Uh, yes, they're joining.
Okay. Well, let's get started. Welcome to the Spring 2026 Library Speakers Series. Our guest today is Dr. Anna Cruz. Her presentation will be Culture, Deafness, and Music, Critical Pedagogy, and a Path to Social Justice. The presentation is being recorded and transcribed and ASL interpreted. After the presentations, if you would put your questions in chat, that would be perfect. Dr. Anna Cruz has taught K-12 undergraduate, graduate levels in both Brazil and the U.S. and has earned multiple teaching and innovation awards during her 25-year career at STLCC Merrimack. She has held visiting academic appointments in Spain, Canada, Brazil, and China, and chaired the third international conference, Paulo Freire, The Global Legacy. Her scholarship centers on critical pedagogy, social justice, the work of Paulo Freire, and music as an art form for deaf people. She received the Paulo Freire Democratic Project Award of Social Justice in 2000 and will be honored with the 2026 Paulo Freire Legacy Award from AERA. Welcome, Dr. Cruz.
Thank you, Ms. Galanis. And let me see here. How do I don't see my screen. Hold on. Stop share for a while. So I wanted to say hello, and I want to say my name, Ana. I'm from Brazil. Welcome to the book talk. So I wanted to try to show a little bit of effort in basically try to sign in, and even though, forgive me, my ASL is not fluent, I have been trying to improve, and that is one of the items that I need to keep on working. I wanted to start with thank yous. Okay, so I wanted to start this presentation today acknowledging love. I wanted to say thank you as an act of love, because I am a strong believer that it is with love and through love, not hate, that we can all make this world better. This book was a true labor of love. So I will start with my family. We are all in my heart, particularly my mother, that taught me since day one that love is commitment. It involves attention, it involves trust, and it involves respect. Love is be there one for another, no matter what. Love is let's face the challenge together. So thank you to all book contributors, including the ones who took the time to endorse the book. So for your powerful contributions to this book. So you have about 24 contributors total. And I will not be saying all your names, you know who you are. And I thank you very much from the heart. Thank you to the colleagues who reviewed the book. Your comments and suggestions made the book much better. Thank you to the staff at the Greater Brill Publishers for all your support. Athena Dimitriou, Simona Cassadio, Emilia Stark, Brian Ramesh, Christine Hededam. Thank you to the library staff and the whole St. Louis Community College for your interest in my work and for organizing this presentation. It is always very special to talk about one's work at the work community, or to the work community, excuse me. I want to especially mention Becky Helbling, Joanne Galanis, Jessica Pohl, Kirsten Abotzi, Neil Doss, and Hannah Shekel. Thank you to the ASL interpreter, Tara Hoff, and all captioners for making communication between diverse groups today possible. Thank you to all my colleagues, near and far, who have been supportive of my work. Following the African proverb, I am because we are. And of course, thank you to all of you from near and far who made time today to join us here. I wanted to conclude this section by acknowledging that we are on the ancestral, sacred land of the Osage Nation, along with the Missouri, Otoe, Ilani Confederacy, among other tribes that inhabited Missouri. So, welcome. Our book is entitled Culture, Deafness, and Music, Critical Pedagogy and a Path to Social Justice. And I would like to have a little bit of interaction. I like to know a little bit of the context to who you're working with. So if you have your phones, your smartphones, could you please get them? And I want to have a feeling of who have joined us today. So if you can scan that QR on your phone, and if you can let us know where are you joining us from today. Tell me the city and the state, if you are in the US, and if you are not in the US, please tell me your country. Okay, all right. St. Louis, Springfield, United Kingdom. Okay, Florissant, Ferguson, St. Louis, Becky, Kirkwood, Connecticut, okay. Fantastic. St. Louis. Ankara, okay, Turkey, thank you. Kirkwood. Rochester, New York. Yes, we have people from near and far. St. Louis. UK, Preston. It's probably evening time already in the UK. Kirkwood. Okay. I think you have a feeling. You do have, like I said, people from near and far. So I have then another question for you. Webster Groves. Okay, I have another question for you. Keep your phones, please. In 2 words, what made you curious about this presentation today? 2 words. My professor, music for the deaf, new ideas, disability, justice, deaf representation, deaf culture, co-author Wafa. Thank you, Wafa. Thanks for being here. Knowledge, music and deafness, offering drumming, disability, deaf culture, critical pedagogy, deaf culture, Okay, Jui Hui, justice, offering drumming, social, deaf representation, deaf culture, disability, my professor, new knowledge, music connection, education, and deafness. Okay, all right. Thank you, people, accessibility in art. Okay. Very good. Thank you so much. You have one person typing. Accessibility. Okay, let's move them. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So let's start with the cover art, since you are interested in the art, right? So as you probably can see, the art of this book is quite unique. And I am very honored that the artist, Nancy Rourke, internationally known deaf artist, she allowed me to use her art, which is entitled Like a River. And when I saw that, when Nancy and I corresponded, I said, Nancy, this is exactly what this book is about. And we didn't even know the book was in the making when, when you have that, of course. So that cover start making us think about what we are going to encounter throughout the book. It represents two worlds. The deaf world, where you see the hands, and you see that we have the sign for a letter D, letter E, letter A, letter F. So you have deaf. And then, so that is the culturally deaf world. And this is the hearing world, where you see mouth, where you see music, where you see lips. So the idea that Nancy Rourke is representing here was a girl that was born deaf, but was educated as a hearing girl. And when she started interacting with the deaf world, she was very confused about her identity. And she becomes like a river, navigating those two worlds. And so she struggles to find her identity. As you can see here on the top, we have the word audism, and which is, of course, a prejudicial way of looking at and working with deaf people. We are going to talk about that as an oppressive kind of approach. And then also what is important to know, here is the face of the little girl. So what is important to know is that we have what we call Rokerism regarding the color scheme. The emphasis is on red, that symbolizes empowerment, yellow, hope and light, and blue, that signifies oppression. So this is one, this is basically the way of representing that is through what we call the influences of DVIA, the deaf view image art, and the Fauvism movement. So that is how the book is basically calling us to pay attention of what is coming. So then I want us to pause and I want us to think. How would you describe culturally deaf people? What is the role of the arts in a culturally deaf world? How is music experienced by culturally deaf people? How can critical pedagogy guide us in addressing forms of oppression such as audism, ableism, oralism for culturally deaf people? Okay, so we try to think and address some of these questions throughout the presentation. But this presentation has a lot to do with how everything started. And I will follow with a quote by Paulo Freire. So Paulo Freire says, there is no such thing as teaching without research, and research without teaching. One inhabits the body of the other. As I teach, I continue to search and research. I teach because I search, because I question, and because I submit myself to questioning. I research because I notice things. I take cognizance of them. And in so doing, I intervene. And intervening, I educate and educate myself. I do research so as to know what I do not yet know, and to communicate and proclaim what I discover. So this comes from Paulo Freire's book, Pedagogy of Freedom, Ethics, Democracy, and Civic Courage. So the idea is everything that you see available today with this book, it was because I teach. So because I teach, I started with the commitment to the deaf community as I was still in my home country in Brazil. So I had a Brazilian student who was born deaf, congenitally deaf, and wanted to learn how to play the piano. She was the only deaf person in the family of hearing musicians. And she didn't see herself different. She wanted to be part of the music activities that the family had, especially on Sundays. And she didn't see her deafness as a limitation for her to enjoy music. She just wanted to be taught. She just wanted to be a pianist. And it was with much surprise and then sadness later that I realized that she couldn't find anybody to teach her how to play the piano. They would look at her deafness and say that this was impossible for her to engage in music activities. So after meeting the family and talking about it, and I actually knew the father, I said, I will try, I will do it. I don't have expertise in teaching music for deaf people, but deaf people are people first, and I have been teaching people how to play the piano. And this was part of my community work at the University of Amazonas, where I was assistant professor during that time. So this was the beginning of what I basically say was my, hold on. Okay, let me just get out of it, which was my commitment. And I bring Freire again. So my commitment is regarding what Paulo Freire says. The more radical the person is, the more fully he or she enters into reality to that, so that knowing it better, he or she can better transform it. This individual is not afraid to confront, to listen, to see the world unveiled. This person is not afraid to meet the people or to enter into dialogue with them. This person does not consider himself or herself the proprietor of history of all people, or the liberator of the oppressed. But he or she does commit himself or herself with history to fight at their side. So I wanted to emphasize here that I am not speaking for deaf people. I cannot do that. I can fight with them, but I cannot speak for them. Otherwise, I'll be committing an act of oppression. I am not deaf myself. I'm hearing. I cannot speak for them, but I can fight with them. I can work with them. I can be at their side. And this was what happened also when I started teaching at St. Louis Community College what you call interdisciplinary studies. I had a very intense research in developing a course that was called very similar to that book. And I realized during that time that the resources that I needed for teaching the course were not available. I had to really put a lot of things together to have material in order to provide this course that actually we had hearing and deaf students taking the course. So it was very interesting. And there was the continuation of the commitment. I decided that there was necessary to have a forum, a place where deaf people could tell my students about their own life experiences. And so as I was looking for resources, the pages of these books were born in my head. And I knew exactly what I would like to have available so that my students could understand a little bit more about deaf culture, about deaf people, about sign language, and also about understanding the hearing sense, because many of them did not understand how deafness started, what could cause, and some of them would ask, how does the ear basically work? So, like I said, the pages of this book start materializing in my head. So more intense research followed. My teaching was driving me to search and research more and more. And I started very carefully reading more the work of the scholars that were publishing in several different places, and looking at their work and decide to contact them and work with them. We need to put a forum together. We need to have a book that talks about this and that. And anyhow, so I'm very thankful that the contributors share the same vision with me and make that book a possibility. So the consideration of how the deaf experience is portrayed through research, it was also one of the very important chapters I would like to see available in the book, because much of the research done about deaf people were done by hearing people. And the way that deaf people are portrayed by hearing people, of course, is not the way that deaf people portray deaf people, right? So there is also a chapter in this book that talks about the deaf experience and how research basically portrays that, but it's written by someone who is a deaf hard of hearing. And then the whole theoretical framework was anchored in the critical pedagogy of Paulo Freire. So Freire critical pedagogy. So this is how the journey started and how the book was basically created. So again, I'm not here to talk too much about my teaching journey. That will be another talk, but for you to see how everything was put together. So the book is divided into 4 parts, and we have for the part number 1, we have 4 chapters, and the first chapter is Beyond Culture, Deaf Studies and the Deaf Body. Then we have Diasporic Deaf Places and Spaces, a comparative overview of sign languages, Black and Deaf in the United States, call for research exploring intersecting identities, and the notion of deaf people as disabled, and the emergence of deaf culture in China. So you can see, our contributors, Baton, Hill, Dunn, and Cook, and Young. So this is part 1. Part 2 is deaf art, affirmation, resistance, and liberation. So we talk about deaf humor and as a political tool. We talk about Here Are My Wings, Deaf Women's Liberation through the Poetry of American Sign Language and Written English, and the transformative power of deaf theater, the DeVere as an art form and a form of activism. Then here we have Duer, Kelston, Christie, Wilkins, and Sutton Spence. Going to section 3, we have deaf music, visions, possibilities, and social justice. We have sign music and the deaf community. Make the sign, make the mark, play the music, teach the world. and silence as a powerful cultural mark, critical pedagogy, music, and radical deaf studies. So you have white, you have Crips, you have Durkheim, and you have Cruz. And here we have the last part, understanding the auditorial system and portraying the diversity of deaf voices through research. Understanding the auditory pathway and hearing loss, analyze the meaning of numbers and words to portray deaf experience. You have Hoffen and you have Kaff. Not to take light, we have the foreword and the afterword by very important figures in the critical pedagogy area and deaf studies area. So our foreword is basically provided by Professor Peter McLaren, and our afterword is provided by Professor Patty Ladd. So let me move here a little so we can talk a little bit about them. So Peter McLaren is one of the key figures in critical pedagogy, and he's an emeritus professor from the University of California, Los Angeles, with more than 50 books and translated in many languages. And one of his most known books is probably Life in Schools. Patty Ladd, Professor Patty Ladd, is a deaf scholar and activist. Foundational work is on work on deaf culture is basically the one that we know probably the most is the Deafwood, and he's also worked on deaf pedagogies, and he is emeritus professor of the University of Bristol, United Kingdom. Like I said, his bestly known work is Understanding Deaf Culture in Search of Deafwood. So some words from the foreword and afterword. Peter McLaren says, the book is an inexhaustibly fascinating and pathfinding collection. Its overall message is direct, like a hammer blow on an iron girder, an indomitable force dedicated to dismantling grave injustice and nurturing the fertile ground of an inclusivity-infused society. And Patty Ladd says, this book and its authors have thus made a significant contribution toward the important task of assisting deaf studies and other deaf domains to understand power relationships through history, including deaf histories, in order to embrace these ongoing challenges and advance toward a more positive future. So people ask us, is something true about having culture for deaf people? Is deaf culture a reality? Of course it is. How come is deaf culture a reality? Deaf culture is basically a way that deaf people share the world. So they share the history, they share the literature, the culture, rules, etiquettes, naming practices. So American culture is rich. And one of the fundamental pieces of deaf culture is the way that they communicate. So sign language. So there is a diversity within deaf culture. There is a global diversity. Many people think that deaf culture is a monolithic kind of culture. No, it's not. It's very diverse. No, it's country specific. It's geographic. We have our chapters 2 from Joseph Hill and chapter 4 by Jun-Hui Yang that talk about the global diversity and the geographical differences that is part of deaf culture. And we also have differences regarding African American within a white majority society and the emerging Black deaf studies, and not so much used yet in many schools and many places what we call the Black American Sign Language, BASL. It was featured, if you watch the Oscars this year, Sinners they were using BASL. They they make that a little bit more visible this year. So there is also the importance of deaf intersectionality. Because people are deaf does not mean that they don't have another identity as other than being deaf. There is the racial identity. There is the gender identity. So you have intersectionality also as part of deaf culture. So as I mentioned before, sign language is an important element of deaf culture. So in our case, American Sign Language. Oh yes, American Sign Language, sign language is not universal. We have American Sign Language, you have British Sign Language, you have Libras that basically stand for the language, the Libras, the language of Libra, thinking in Portuguese and English, I'm sorry. The language, Linguagem Brasileira de Sinais is the sign language used in Brazil. You also have the French Sign Language, you have the German Sign Language, and you name it. We have a sign language is not a universal kind of language that people think that you can basically use sign language and communicate with one sign language. It's universal. So let sign language be taught in school, opposed to oralism and mainstreaming. No hearing aids needed. So that is the issue. In our schools, we still see most of the time the pressure of having the natural language of deaf people forbidden, because that is sometimes the idea that only through speaking you can communicate. We emphasize bilingualism. Okay, you wanted to teach a deaf person to speak? Okay, we can try that in school, but don't minimize the natural language or the native language, American Sign Language in our case. Okay, so there is an importance in our deaf education to basically recognize that this is an identifier of a culture. That is the glue, that is the culture mark of the deaf culture. So that brings Patty Ladd back to us with the concept of deafhood. So in the search of deafhood, Patty Ladd says to us, deafhood is not seen as a finite state, but as a process by which deaf individuals come to actualize their deaf identity, positing that those individuals construct their identity around several differently ordered sets of priorities and principles, which are affected by various factors such as nation, era, and class. Patty Ladd also tells us deafhood represents a process that the struggle by deaf individuals to explain to themselves and each other their own existence in the world, in shaping their lives with each other as a community, and enacting those explanations. So deaf people engage in a daily praxis, a continual internal and external dialogue. So as they learn about themselves through that internal dialogue, they also express and share with others that personhood, that deafhood, what basically means to be deaf. So brings us to deaf art, right? And this was as the book was developing, there was a section that grew considerably beyond what I imagined initially that the book would look like. So the book, to a certain extent, developed its own identity as it grew, if I can put like that, right? So deaf art became a focal point also for that book. And deaf art is very close to my heart because, as I mentioned, I'm an artist. I grew up in a conservatory of music. I was, before coming to the US, in a department of art and music. So art is very, 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 very deep in my heart. So deaf art is always a way of a fulcrum of radical possibilities for the deaf community. The deaf artistic expression is often political And it is, if you think about the deaf art, it can be as affirmation, while they celebrate deaf culture. Deaf culture can be as resistance, highlighting hegemonic relationships and oppression brought about by the hearing world. And deaf art can also lead to liberation. So events, the subjectivity of history, the narratives that have been taken for granted without question, find vivid interrogation through the art. And this is a quote from Emily. Through the art, deaf people communicate with each other and beyond, and become part of a culture of resistance, according to Lampert. And through the art, they show the soul of deaf people. And that is quoting myself, right? The deaf rich soul. So deaf art is very important as examples, like I mentioned before, affirmation, resistance, activism, and liberation. So the key elements, the political elements, is expressed in this book through deaf human, deaf poetry, deaf theater, DVIA, the deaf view image art, sign music, and music as a performance, a private activity. Remember that I mentioned my student in Brazil. Her decision of engaging with music to a certain extent in her heart was an act of rebellion, an act of dissent. Why can't I learn how to play the piano just because I'm deaf? Let's change those rules, please. Let's change that ideology of the impossibility of what we deaf people can do and cannot do. So there was a challenge too. And these are examples of the VIA. So that is the American Sign Language was once called the Ameslam. And this is an image by Betty Miller, 1972. So this is called shackle hands, broken fingers, suppressing signing, use of sign language, the hegemony of oralism. So that is basically resistance art. So that is an example of how the VIA shows resistance, right? You also have here Everywhere We Stand by Nancy Rourke. So those hands stand for unity and justice, and we support each other, symbolize the demonstration for deaf rights, displays also the sign union flag. The sign union flag is also known as the deaf flag. And if you can look at the image and concentrate here to your, hold on here, I'm trying to have the laser. If you can look here at the art of Nancy Rourke, you can see here the flag, the deaf flag, what we basically was initially sign union flag by Arnaud Ballard. Arnaud Ballard was a French deafblind artist. And the idea of the deaf flag, if you see here, is a hand. It's a hand, it represents unity, recognition, and the continuous fight for equal rights, right? So the turquoise blue represents deaf community and sign language pride and unity. So that hand is on the top of a yellow hand, if you will, and the yellow represents light, an enlightened spirit, life, awakened mind, coexistence. And then you have the dark blue in the back, and that dark blue represents earth, represents humanity, represents living in accordance with the planet. So it was the flag was officially approved as a deaf flag in 2023 by the World Federation of Deaf. Okay, so this is an example of art as an affirmation, so affirmation art. Okay. Yeah. Let's get away from that laser. Now we move in then to sign music, right? I wanted to show briefly here a Rooster 6 music. Okay, so Rooster 6 music performance. Let me, for a moment, stop that. And share my screen. That way. I do not know if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen? Somebody can give me a feedback?
No, doctor. We just see you.
You just see me. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm trying to share my screen here with you to present. Apologize for the technology. That's usually my main concern, how technology responds when you go to show some items outside of the. Let's see how it goes here.
Thanks for coming in.
All right, sorry.
Of course.
Can you see my screen?
We still just see you, doctor.
Would you move it to the other monitor, please?
Can you see it now?
Yes, doctor.
Thank you so much. Okay, so there is Ian Sanborn. He's a deaf performer who has performed with different theater companies, including the National Theater of the Deaf for more than 10 years, as well as attending a theater academy. He's currently a psychology student with a focus on counseling at Johnson and Wales University in Providence, Rhode Island. And what he presents here is a renowned piece, The Rooster, of American Sign Language literature that uses visual vernacular, VV, a poetic, cinematic form of sign language to tell a story focused on imagery, rhythm, and physical characterization. So the VV, the piece falls under, this piece falls under VV, the visual vernacular, which is a genre of ASL poetry, and that functions like a cinematographic technique often focuses on the balance between physical opposites and intense physical poetry. Okay, so we'll have to stop, so you move on, so you have an idea about the work of Ian Sanborn. Now, as you go back, I also wanted to share also the work of Steinmark. So the work of Steinmark is very different from the work of Ian Sanborn. As it okay. That is Steinmark.
Most definitely, if you ask me in this rap biz, I'm the most not to say most deaf, but if you ask me in this rap biz, I'm the most deaf. Ain't nobody else done it. I love I'm the best. Making all that noise without noise. I'm complex. Jeff Jam ain't better than me. I'm making the Def Jam. You looking at me funny like I committed the 30. Like I can't rhyme, but when you read my ears, you can't sign. Voice of the deaf people, son, Marky, I still gonna act like we ain't equal. Like I'm not an artist, you did wrong. So I ain't trying to hate you like I got my head on song. Listen, if you wanna talk to the man don't listen, talk to the hand. Listen.
Okay, so I have to basically call your attention to a couple of things here. A Steinmark as Steinmark presents the rap to us, the lyrics very important to pay close attention to, because he's challenging us to communicate with him by talking to his hand, right? So the idea that we need to look at, right? I do not know if you're seeing my screen. Don't have a feedback about my screen.
We can see your PowerPoint.
Are we good?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, we can see it now.
So when you talk about Steinmark, the music is called "Talk to the Hand," and the rap basically brings us to think about the oppression that deaf people can go through, especially when it comes about music. You're talking to me that I cannot rhyme. Look at me again, look at my hands. Oh, but you cannot sign, right? So how can you communicate with me if you cannot sign? So are you still thinking that we are not equal? Why? Because I cannot talk? Oh, talk to my hand, talk to my hand. I'm using headphones. Talk to me. If you want to talk to the man, talk to my hand. So you see that it's a sign, the art is a sign of resistance. It's a sign of bringing the identity of deaf people through sign language. And sign language is the way that we communicate. So again, deaf studies become then an academic discipline. And that academic disciplines look at the way that deaf people live, the way of deaf ways of knowing, deaf ways of being through communities, networks. And so that is, according to Kusters, we have a whole study now, that area of study that concentrate on deaf people, because you're looking at the oppressive forces such as oralism, audism, ableism, the lack of understanding of diversity and intersectionality in the deaf world. So the oralism is the idea that deaf people have to communicate by using speech only and lip reading only, other than sign language. And that is usually where policies are focused. Policies are made based on oralism only. So audism is the notion that one is superior, and based on the ability that you can hear or not. So you're superior if you can hear. If you cannot hear, you basically are not worthy. You are not. You are marginalized. You are pushed to the margins. So Tom Humphries basically say that audism is the notion that one is superior based on one's ability to hear or to behave in the manner of one who hears. And then you have ableism, which is the discrimination in favor of the non-disabled people. And as you talked before, there is a lack of understanding about diversity and intersectionality. Intersectionality is basically the idea that you are having other identities that intersect, like the example, Black, deaf Americans. And so critical pedagogy comes to challenge that, and the idea that critical pedagogy can become a means, a guide for us to fight that oppression together with deaf studies. And as you put it together, critical pedagogy, as you say, challenges to us to recognize, engage, critique, so to transform existing undemocratic social practices and institutional structures that reproduce and sustain inequalities as oppressive social identities and relations. So the marriage of critical pedagogy and deaf studies, I basically say that it could be called radical deaf studies, because as Freire would say, human existence cannot be silent, nor can it be nourished by false words, but only by true words, which means with which men and women transform the world. To exist humanly is to name the world, to change it. Once named, the world in its turn reappears to the namers as a problem and require them to basically say a new name, have a new naming. So Freire called us not to be silent, to name the world, to identify problems, and then to work on transforming and overcoming those problems. So I'm going to stop that here. This one, critical pedagogy and deaf studies then, through various forms of expression, particularly the arts, including music, deaf people can name the problems afflicting the deaf world while using true words and with it creating agency for transformation. So Freudian critical pedagogy can be a path to social justice, can educate the hearing and deaf world, and can transform, can inform, and can make policymakers accountable in order to transform the world. And so, again, radical deaf studies could be that fusion of deaf studies with critical pedagogy Anchored in critical pedagogy, the goal is not just to inform and to address fundamental inequities, but to resist and to transform the world. It needs to establish collaborative agency and political solidarity between the hearing and deaf worlds to understand the difference between. And marginality that is imposed by oppressive structure, and that marginality one chooses as a site of resistance, as location for radical openness and possibilities. So there is a difference when you talk about marginality, according to bell hooks. There is a marginality that we impose, that is imposed by oppressive structure, and there's marginality that one chooses as a form of resistance. So takeaways from this presentation: there is much beauty in silence, but not in being silenced, in being dismissed, and in being oppressed and dehumanized. I would like us to think about becoming conscious about equal opportunities for and respectable interactions with deaf people. I would like us to, with such understanding, understand that that is crucial for the transformation, for better deaf people's experience in schools, educational settings, public spaces, society in general. So I also want you to think about that it is important for us to gain a perspective on the uniqueness of the deaf world, the socio-cultural view of deafness, not just the medical view, but there is the socio-cultural view of deafness and the radical deaf studies. So radical deaf studies can be a paramount importance to envision a present and future that includes education also for deaf people, the education that is fair, the education that is accessible, the education that provides opportunities for interpreters, for more ASL in the classroom. So this is very, very important for us to think about that. And I would like us, as a takeaway, recognize the importance that the education can have for liberation, for collective well-being, for democratic educative possibilities. And there are some risks that you need to take in order for this particular scenario to happen. So there is educational justice that is required through policies and practices. And finally, I want to think how special and how robust the soul of deaf people are. There is a robust tapestry of beauty and diversity. So I wanted to have you answering one more question for us. What is one action you take to support deaf culture after this presentation? Can you have your phone one more time and think about, now that I have perhaps learned more about deaf people, deaf culture, deaf art, deaf music, sign language, what is one action that you take to support deaf culture?
Oh, and Dr. Cruz, here's a
Yes.
question from the chat. It says, and this you've kind of covered it a bit. What are a few specific things each of us could do to contribute to better inclusivity? For instance, to increase likelihood that ASL or other sign languages are taught or more fully integrated into education.
Okay, I think like you mentioned, we need to make people conscious. First of all, that ASL is a native way for deaf people to communicate, and that there is no more or less that we need to think about, but we need to think as equality of opportunities. You need to educate our policymakers. You need to educate the leaders in our school settings that ASL is not a privilege. ASL or any sign language, depending on wherever you are in the world, sign language is a right. It's not a privilege. It's a right of the deaf people to communicate. So let's have structures that permit interpreters to do the work. Sometimes you have spaces in schools in which you don't have adequate space for interpreters to interact with the students in the classroom. So those are small steps overall that each one of us can take. But as we grow together, as I mentioned at the beginning, the African proverb, I am because we are. So if you work together, that the collaboration, resistance to old norms, to old ideologies of not belonging in society, if you can educate one person each day, imagine how many other people are going to be educated through the people that you educate every day. So I take my job as an example. I have 20 students in my class that I can try to educate each time, each day, about equality, about equity. And if I think about, as they become teachers, how many students are going to the hands of each one of the 20 people that were in my class once, I think we can make a dent in the world. I think you can make a little change. I hope I addressed your question.
Yeah. Doctor, here's another suggestion from a viewer. It would be great if libraries made sure deaf-made books are on their shelves. Local communities can work with deaf organizations to fly the Sign Union flag during the third week of September to show unity in honor of International Week of Sign Languages.
Excellent, beautiful. And I do not know if we have a little bit extra time. I actually thought about, I know you already told me you are here, you are part of that presentation. So if there are some of the contributors who wanted to make to the contributors to the book that wanted to say something important that I might have missed, like that idea was just so beautifully put together and to share with us. If I have some of the book contributors that would like to share some of their thoughts, ideas, I don't want to put them on the spot, but maybe I didn't mention something important. Those ideas that are coming are very beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Anyone, please post anything in the chat.
Excuse me, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I just asked viewers to post any thoughts, ideas in the chat.
You can do that, or if you want to raise your hand, there is one thing with deaf people, you don't have the camera right away because those cameras are sensitive to sound. So if you raise your hand, you can open your camera if you are deaf and you wanted to share, and our interpreter can voice your ASL for us. And with that, I just wanted to share with you my Portuguese language. Obrigada. Thank you. And ASL, thank you.
And thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Cruz.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for organizing. I think that everybody's going to take something home. And like we mentioned in those actions, we are all responsible to do something, even if you think it's very small, to make the world better and to make the world more equal for deaf colleagues, for deaf people, for our deaf students. Thank you so much once again.
I have asked about would we have access to the recorded presentation to share it with colleagues?
Yes, the link will be sent out later this week for
Good.
access to the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's good to see you all.
Okay, I see some of our attendees now that I just turn off my camera from the, the slides. And any questions, any other comments, any other ideas?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Doctor.